Hi everyone. We're going to finish the term. Our last lesson is going to be on chapter 16, which covers environmental health. So we're going to take a look at how the environment has an effect on humans and how we as humans have an effect on the environment. Also how exposure to toxins, which can be things like UV rays, pollutants, can affect our overall health. So the first thing we're going to talk about is poisoning. Most poisonings occur in the home. Less than 1% occur at school or workplaces, and less than 1% occur in healthcare settings. So that leaves, again, the vast majority happening in or around the home. Most poisonings are unintentional, which include things like medication errors, bites and stings, like people who are allergic to bee stings, food poisoning, and occupational mishaps. About 18% of all poisonings are actually intentional, where someone is trying to commit suicide or overdoses. And in your book on page 552, there is a text box that talks about tips to prevent poisoning. So some simple things like keeping medications locked up, keep out of the reach of children, because the ones who unintentionally ingest this stuff most of the time are children. So some of the things that can cause poisoning in the home would be things like toxic plants, household cleaning products, medications, vitamins, lead poisoning, and carbon monoxide poisoning, and we're going to talk about each one of these. If you suspect someone has been poisoned, if they've ingested any of those things that we just previously mentioned on that first slide, contact a poison control center and find out what should be done for that person. If a person becomes suddenly ill with symptoms that affect many parts of the body, if they appear drowsy or indifferent and they can't be awakened, or if they exhibit any bizarre behavior, call 911. Also, get them en route so that that person can get help right away. So toxic plants are one thing that we can find around the home. It's a common cause of poisoning in children, and some examples that you might be familiar with are the stems and leaves of tomato plants, which I actually didn't know until just now, holly berries, morning glory seeds, narcissus and daffodil bulbs, rhubarb leaves, and sweet pea seeds. So if you have any of these things at your house, again, try to make sure that they are kept out of the reach or out of the area where children can get a hold of them. One that I had always heard of are actually poinsettias, which you see, usually around the holidays. They're actually not toxic to humans, and about 1 to 2% of all mushroom species are toxic to humans. So again, always better to be safe and just keep them out of the way. Another type of poisoning in the home is cleaning aids, medications, vitamins, ingesting any of these. Again, children under the age of 5 are the ones who are most likely to ingest these toxic products. Warning stickers are generally not effective. The little kids don't really recognize them or understand that that's what they mean, and so they're still going to end up sort of experimenting or testing out those materials. Even child-proof packaging can sometimes be opened by children, so even though it has a safety lid on it or things like that, again, all of this stuff, medications, vitamins, cleaning products, anything that could be toxic should be kept in locked cabinets and out of the way of children. Lead poisoning. We don't see too much of this anymore because lead paint has been banned, basically, but lead poisoning can be very serious, and it has effects on the central nervous system, which are your brain and spinal cord. It can cause coma, convulsions, or even death if enough is ingested. Again, many sources have been removed: leaded gasoline, solder in food and beverage cans, leaded paint. Again, where it comes up is when we're in like older homes and we're remodeling, or we're using old pieces of decor, old doors, old windows to decorate with, and they may have been painted with lead paint. Children are extremely susceptible to absorbing lead through their digestive tracts or lungs, so breathing in the fumes or the dust particles from the lead paint, or if they actually do ingest any of it, In adults, we only absorb about 11% if it would get into our digestive tract. With kids, it's anywhere from 30 to 75% will then get circulated through their bloodstream. So it's really important to make sure that we keep kids away from anything that contains lead. If children are exposed to a lot of lead-containing products, they have been shown to develop learning disabilities, impaired nervous system development, and delayed growth. One that we do see a little bit more is actually carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas, and fires are a major source of carbon monoxide poisoning. So if there are any fires or fireplaces in the home, this is something we need to be cautious of. Another one is auto exhaust. So make sure that if your car is running, it's either outside or if it's in the garage, that the garage door is open and there's air exchange going on. It can happen with a malfunctioning furnace or space heaters, gas cooking stoves. All of these can produce carbon monoxide, and if there would be a leak in any one of those lines that's bringing the gas into the home, then the home can start to fill with carbon monoxide and people can get sick. So to lower the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, properly handle tools, appliances that burn any of these fuels, properly vent stoves and furnaces, any like grills, gas-powered tools, outdoors, or very well ventilated areas. And the best thing would be to install carbon monoxide detectors so that they'll actually, like a smoke alarm, go off if they detect high enough levels of carbon monoxide. Some of the signs and symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning include a progressively worsening headache, fatigue, dizziness, nausea and vomiting, reddish skin, and blurry vision. So if you notice any of these signs and symptoms and you have any of these risks in your home, you might want to get checked out for carbon monoxide poisoning. Asbestos is another material. Again, kind of like lead paint, we don't see quite as much of this anymore unless we're in an older home or building. But asbestos was used in products because it was fire resistant. So it was used a lot in older homes and buildings, in flooring, ceilings, walls. But inhaling these fibers can cause asbestosis as well as lung and stomach cancer, we have now found. So anything that contains asbestos has been banned by the Environmental Protection Agency since 1996. So again, we're not seeing this in any of the newer construction, but if you are in an older home or an older building, there is a possibility that some of your housing materials can contain asbestos. If it's intact, there's really not any risk, but if it becomes damaged or disturbed or starts to deteriorate, it will release fibers into the air and then they are inhaled, and that's where we can start to run into some problems. Electromagnetic radiation, these are things like x-rays, radio waves. There's no major negative health effects to low levels of exposure to this. However, medical researchers have sort of suggested that we prudently avoid any type of excess exposure, such as when x-ray technicians, they leave the room every time they do an x-ray, because if they stayed in the room all day long taking x-ray after x-ray, that would be a lot of exposure to the electromagnetic radiation. So for you to go and get one x-ray and they're still going to put protective coverings on you, where you don't need to be x-rayed, the risk is relatively minor. But again, for someone who has repeated exposure to those, that increases their risk. So we should always try to minimize our exposure. Where we might see this now, probably a little bit more commonly, is there is the debate or the question of what type of radiation is being given off by cell phones. Everyone is using cell phones, and so they are still doing some research on that right now. Irradiation of food. So there is a debate that goes on about this. So irradiation is treating food products with radiation to kill bacteria, and we use it on foods such as beef and poultry. It inhibits the sprouting of vegetables and delays the ripening of fruits so that they last a little bit longer. So supporters argue that the irradiation is going to make the food supply safer, boosts quality and extends shelf life. So there are some benefits to that. However, opponents argue that irradiation can affect color, odor, texture of food, and it might be harmful to our health. So there is a lot of debate out there right now about all the different things concerning food, genetically modified, treating them with pesticides and things like that. So this is another one of those things that is debated. Speaking of pesticides, things that can happen in or around the workplace, which again accounts for a small, very small percentage of poisonings, but it can happen. One is pesticide poisoning, and this would be exposure to and inhalation of toxic solvents. And solvents are a liquid that something else is dissolved in, and any other chemicals. Indoor air pollution, and most pesticide poisonings are going to occur in people who work in manufacturing facilities where they make pesticides, or they work usually on like farms where they apply pesticides. It's hard to detect an exact relationship to say that for sure pesticides caused any disease or illness in these people, because there's usually a lot of other factors at play as well. Pesticide residue on food is not considered to be toxic, but it is usually a good idea to rinse off any fruits or vegetables before they're consumed. So again, in the workplace, there could be exposure to and possible inhalation of toxic chemicals. Again, those solvents, the liquids where other things are dissolved, are going to slow nerve transmission in the brain and spinal cord. Heavy metal exposure is linked to nervous system damage. That's like lead that we talked about a little bit earlier. Exposure to any of these toxins could cause cancer, and OSHA does regulate procedures in industries to try to protect the health of the workers. Indoor air pollution can lead to things such as sick building syndrome, is what it's called, and this is when symptoms are reported by occupants of large buildings. So it's most likely due to something that's happening within that residence. It's usually due to poor ventilation, and chemicals or toxins are able to build up in the environment. Formaldehyde is a potential toxin that's used in the manufacture of building materials and furnishings. It can be released into the air and then inhaled. Radon gas is another type of toxin that can contaminate indoor air. Radon is present in rocks and soils, so usually where we see that is in homes or buildings that have underground like basements, and that radon is released from the rocks and the soils. It might get through cracks in the basement walls, and it can start to fill up the air in those areas. Repeated or long-term exposure to radon can increase the chance of lung cancer. So environmental health in the outdoors, we're going to talk about things such as water pollution, air pollution, and noise pollution. Water pollution includes sources such as aquifers, which is just standing groundwater, lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. Any of these water sources can become contaminated with pathogens such as bacteria, viruses, or protozoans, chemical waste from industries, fertilizers and pesticide runoff, and heavy metals such as mercury and lead. This is a bigger problem in countries that don't have water purification systems. Here in the US, minus a few places that have been in the news recently, our water supply is generally pretty safe. So again, monitoring of the nation's water supply is done by the Environmental Protection Agency. They enacted the Clean Water Act in 1972, which prohibits the dumping of toxic chemicals into any surface water. Also, to make sure that it is safe, 75% of American drinking water is chlorinated, and it must also be transported to homes and offices and buildings in lead-free pipes. Bottled water is not necessarily healthier to drink than tap water. In some instances, it certainly is, right? It's going to be better than drinking water from some sources. However, even using things like Brita filters, they use like a carbon filter. That'll help to remove any carbon-containing compounds and some of the chlorine that has been added to the water. Air pollution can be caused by substances such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, and particulates in the air that can threaten health. So any of these things can be unhealthy to people. Two major contributors to air pollution are cars, automobiles, and coal-fired power plants that burn fossil fuels. So even the use of small gasoline-powered machines, such as leaf blowers or lawn mowers, can contribute to air pollution as well. With air pollution, we can get things like acid rain, acid precipitation can form, smog, which is a mix of smoke and fog. We usually see that over larger cities, such as like New York and Los Angeles. That can be harmful to the lungs. Particulates can irritate the lungs and contribute to the development of bronchitis, emphysema, and asthma, or it can make those existing conditions even worse. So some of the things that you may have heard of is the AQI, the Air Quality Index, which reports on the 5 major pollutants, which are carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and sulfur dioxide, as well as particulates. So you may have seen, like either on a Weather Channel app or seen on the news, some days they say that the air quality index is so high that people with compromised systems should probably stay indoors. And that's what they're talking about. So when they notice that those levels are getting higher, try to avoid being outside. Noise pollution, exposure to noise actually increases the amount of stress hormones that's secreted into the bloodstream. And so there is an additional effect on your health as well. Sound intensity is expressed in decibels. Each 10 decibel increase means a 10-fold increase in that intensity of sound. So sounds at 50 decibels or less are considered quiet or soft. Sounds at 80 decibels or higher are annoying and can be harmful over time. Over 40% of the population is exposed to enough noise to cause permanent hearing loss. Think about, all the loud noises that you're exposed to over a lifetime, and that can actually do damage to your hearing. So if at all possible, if you know you're going to be in a loud, noisy environment or exposed to loud sounds, try to wear ear protection if at all possible. So across the lifespan, environmental health is important for people of all ages. However, there are some age groups where we tend to see things more readily than others. For example, young children are at most risk for unintentional poisoning by ingesting toxic substances. They just don't understand that what they are eating or drinking can be potentially harmful to them. Carbon monoxide and lead can injure fetuses and young children because their nervous systems are still developing, so it's very important to make sure that our youngest of the young children are kept away from these toxic chemicals. Also, elderly and people with chronic lung or heart disease are susceptible to carbon monoxide poisoning and air pollutants. So like I said, looking for those alerts when the air quality is not good and trying to avoid being outside at those times. All right, well, that is it for this chapter. Thanks, guys, and as always, if you have any questions, let me know.